So I'm here with Angie Vaux. Thank you so much for joining me, Angie. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So you're the founder and CEO of Women in Tech. Obviously, a lot of your background has been in tech and various industries kind of circling that. With a lot of them being so male dominated, what's been your experience of being a woman in those spaces and how that's kind of led you to where you are now?
Thank you. So it's a great question. And as we know that the tech space is still very much male dominated. The latest statistics are, I think, between 25 and 27% of the workforce is female globally. And if you look at sort of women in leadership, depending on which country, it's somewhere between 5 and 10%. So there's a huge gender leadership gap that really needs to be closed. In terms of my experience as a woman in the tech environment, I've been very fortunate to work for some very forward thinking companies that have actively supported and promoted women in the workplace, but also provided that allyship and mentorship, which has helped me succeed. But that said, generally across the industry, you know, the boys club does still exist. And I think, people think that boys club has gone. And even with the most forward thinking of companies, there are still those networks that, the golf trips, the trips to the pub and other activities that typically women aren't included in or indeed invited to. And that holds women back in the workplace because they're not afforded the same opportunities, the same networks. They don't have the informal updates on sort of what's going on in a company, and so therefore it can hold women back in the workplace. And so one of the reasons I set up Women in Tech Forum was to help women with the skills, the confidence, and the network to be successful as a woman in a male dominated environment, and to cover some of the skills that we're not necessarily taught in the workplace. So, for example, how do you build your executive presence? How do you use powerful language to get your point across? How do you know, take control of your career and really push for what you want? Women in Tech Forum started out as a passion project about 4 years ago, but very quickly they saw sort of the demand and interest for a forum such as this. So it's now a full-time business. We're headquartered in the UK and operate globally as well.
Great. It's really interesting what you say about the boys club because, as you said it, I could feel myself responding and thinking, gosh, it's such an old fashioned phrase that we have. And an industry like tech that prides itself on innovation and future thinking and, really disrupting the way that things are done. And yet, this way of doing business is still so intrinsic in it and not kind of looking differently at how it might be done.
Absolutely. And that's almost sort of systemic because when we think about it, the workplace was designed historically by men for men. And if we look at sort of people in leadership, 9 times out of they are male and they're sort of, white in their mid 50s. And, there is a lot of, or can be a lot of unconscious bias in the way people behave, in the perceptions we have of men versus women. If women sort of speak up, they're seen as being aggressive. Whereas if, I don't think anyone's ever accused a man of being aggressive. They're assertive, they're confident, they make, clear decisions. So there is a lot of unconscious bias that, really needs to be addressed, and even, microaggressions as well. There's a lot of microaggressions in the workplace. And in fact, they are on the rise. I think 57% of women, according to a recent report by Deloitte, experience microaggressions at work. And then if we look at intersectionality, women of color, or if you're gay or lesbian, if you have a disability, those levels of microaggressions are even higher. So there's a lot of change that we need to do in terms of educating people, because a lot of the time people aren't aware of the fact that, they are displaying microaggressions or they do have biases because it's something that, culturally was acceptable previously. And it's the way things have always been done and it was okay before. So why isn't it now? So it's almost sort of opening up the communication and the dialogue to know that actually it's okay. We all make mistakes. We all have unconscious bias. In fact, 90% of our brains operate on an unconscious level. But it's about raising awareness of that and creating that culture of feedback to having that psychological safety so that people can give that feedback and say, that comment caused me offense. I know you didn't intend to. A better way of sort of conveying that point would be using this language because also people don't know any different. So I
Yeah.
think have a responsibility to educate people on what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable, different sort of phraseology to use. And you can only do that if you have that culture of open communication. And if you created that psychological safety and that education platform for people to speak up without
Mm.
fear of repercussion.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. People being open to hearing it as well as feeling comfortable to giving it. Like that's the most important part, isn't it? One of the things that strikes me is, you in your previous career, you worked at really senior levels, obviously progressing up to really high levels in these tech businesses. How did you navigate that old the boys club mentality?
It's a great question. And I think, as always, you have to have the skill, the expertise, you have to deliver on your objectives. I think that's a standard for any role. I think for me, I was very lucky that I had mentors and allies throughout my career. And I was put on a top talent program that opened up a lot of opportunities for me that perhaps I wouldn't otherwise have had access to. But also, reflecting sort of over many years, and because that's the environment that I'd always known, this male dominated environment, unconsciously, I sort of sought to fit in to that. So I dressed like a man. I wore the black suit to work every day, trouser suit, the pinstripe shirt, with the cufflinks, didn't wear any makeup. And I also participated in sort of the boys' club activities. So, I stayed out drinking late. I even got taken to strip clubs, which obviously nowadays you just wouldn't do. And that wasn't really a conscious decision. I think that was just all I'd known at the time. And rightly or wrongly, it sort of served me very well and created these opportunities, created these relationships with very senior people, which enabled me to sort of springboard in my career. But at the time, I was completely unaware of that.
What was or was there rather a catalyst for realizing that sort of conformity that you'd perhaps had with that kind of boys club, even acknowledging that, there were some ways that it, as well as, all of your skills and your expertise kind of helped support you with the progression. But was there a moment where you sort of realized, oh, I've been a part of this club and actually maybe it's not a club that I want to be in. It's maybe not one that I feel right or comfortable in anymore.
Yes. Sort of reflecting back, I think a pivotal moment was actually having my first child at the age of 33. And I was sort of almost dropped like a hot potato in terms of my career, the progression, the support, the allyship. I was sort of dropped out of the boys' club. Uh, so I think that was when I sort of really acknowledged, I suppose, that the don't know if I can use the word privilege, but the access that I had throughout my entire career
Yeah.
suddenly disappeared overnight. And, I know a lot of women today sort of have that fear of what happens when I have a baby, I won't get the promotion, that maternal bias where, you're seen as less capable, less committed because you've got a child and a family, maybe stricter with boundaries. I was very lucky because I had a sort of support system. I lived in Asia, so I had live-in help. I was still able to travel internationally. I was still able to do the nighttime calls because I had that infrastructure in place. So I think that really stalled my career development. And it took me a good 2 years for people to actually recognize that actually I'm still as capable, maybe even more capable, even with a child and family. But it did sort of have quite a big negative impact on my career. And then I think, as you get more senior, and I think when I sort of took on my sort of next role, running a region, running 2 regions, in fact, where, I was top of the tree, I think that's when I really sort of stepped into my authentic self. There wasn't a boys' club in place. I dressed for the clothes I wanted to dress in. I led the way I wanted to lead. And I think, it's taken quite a few years actually to really bring my authentic self to work, because I'd sort of almost been productized, not because anybody had forced me and not because I'd made that conscious decision. But I think, in the back of my mind, it's probably that desire to fit in, that desire to be one of the boys, one of the group. So it took me many years really to sort of step out of that and have that confidence to be my authentic self and to, really stand by my points of view. And so it's quite an interesting journey,
Mhm.
but it did take many years to sort of really step out of that into my authentic self.
When it comes to the work that you're doing now, so I know that Women in Tech Forum are partnering with some really big tech organizations. I know that you work with the likes of LinkedIn and Meta and lots of other names that, people would be familiar with. Doing a lot of this work around events and coaching and leadership support. What are the changes that you're starting to see now when it comes to better representation for women, better inclusivity, and things that are working well?
So we've been doing this for 4 years full time, and there has been quite a noticeable shift in terms of a real active commitment to drive positive change in the industry and to be more inclusive, to be more diverse, and to create that culture where people feel that sense of belonging and inclusion. Previously, for some companies, obviously not, but it was often sort of a tick box exercise, whereas now I'm seeing organizational wide, top down, bottom up, horizontally across the organization, of that real commitment to drive change and to, train managers on how to, you know, create more inclusive environments, how to reduce unconscious bias, how to hire a more diverse talent pool. So there's been a real shift. The pace of change is not as fast as we would like it. I think was according to the World Economic Forum, if we continue at the current rate of change, we wouldn't see gender parity until another 120 years, something like
Mm.
that. So there's still a lot more work to be done. But I think over time, as more women progress into leadership, then we will see more change throughout the organization. And then also the focus on early career talent. So there's a lot of focus on that now, and bringing in much more of a gender balanced workforce at that early careers level will therefore, with the right structures in place, start to change the makeup of the workforce. But that's going to take time and commitment as well.
Mhm. What do you find is the barrier that businesses have around this? Because I feel like there's the desire for change and a recognition that it sometimes it's like we recognize that actually financially and from a pure business perspective, actually we need to have better representation, but also it's absolutely the right and equitable thing. But then, perhaps actually not necessarily doing things, knowing that there's a problem, but not actually necessarily doing anything to solve it. What do you tend to find is the barrier that businesses kind of come up against in that situation?
So I think one of the barriers is you need to have commitment at all levels of the organization. It shouldn't just be limited to the HR or DEIB team, nor should it be limited to the CEO. So unless you're actively driving it through the organization and tracking the performance against the goals a company has set, it can be very difficult to really move the needle. I've seen some organizations now where they're actually embedding diversity KPIs into sort of senior leaders, managers managing managers, comp plans, whereby if they don't hit certain diversity metrics, they will not get their on target earnings, however well they
Mm.
perform against the business metrics. So it has to be sort of committed throughout the organization. And I think the other one is we talked about psychological safety. With all the best will in the world and all the measures, if you don't create that culture where it's psychologically safe to call things out in a sort of non-confrontational manner, to discuss the mistakes that we all make them, nobody's perfect, and to sort of, correct those over time, you're not really going to see change. I mean, there's been a lot of things in the news, where some senior chairmen have sort of come out and said, I'm just not going to bother talking to women or commenting because it just gets me into trouble. So I'm not
Mm.
gonna bother. I'm not going to mentor any women. I don't want to put myself in that situation. It's really not helpful.
No,
Uh,
no.
so, and it is difficult for men. I have lots of conversations with, male leaders who are worried about how they're perceived. Are they going to do or say the right thing? Are they going to be cancelled? So it is a real fear. And I think the way to overcome that is to have those open dialogues, to be open to feedback, to listen to that feedback and action it as well. I know one sort of senior male CEO who, always asks for feedback is like, what do I do well in terms of diversity and sort of, not just for women, but across the board? And what can I do more of? Because sometimes we just do things and don't realize what a positive impact it's having, but also what should I stop doing and actioning that. So I think, the more open you can be, it takes that fear on both sides out.
Mm.
You continuously learn and evolve together. One thing I've seen, which I really liked with another client, is they have like a fail Friday. So in the team meeting, and usually you'd be talking about, what are your wins for this week? What are your losses? What's your focus for next week? What's your pipeline? All of those kind of things. But actually, this meeting is all about what did you do wrong this week?
Mm.
And what did you learn from it? Which I
Mhm.
think actually it's a really brave thing to do. So
Absolutely.
you're getting people to talk about the mistakes that they've made, maybe microaggressions or offenses that they've caused unintentionally. But also by sharing that with the wider group, you learn also from other people's mistakes. And then you discuss, okay, well, what should we have done? What should we have said? So that you all learn and grow together.
Mhm, mhm. And it does create that safety in making mistakes is okay and it's human, and it's how we then deal with it and take it forward. So I think as you were saying about, the fear that I think the fear that men sort of some men are having around engaging with this kind of thing, like that fear is like the enemy of progress and the progress that is so important. And the system is the one that wins when, that fear is built up and is triggered in men. And creating these spaces where actually making it possible for everybody to be open to that. It's definitely one thing I also find with the women that I work with is the fear of making a mistake and the possible consequence of that can be at times debilitating. And so again, like building a really good positive relationship with failure is, I think, a really powerful thing.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. Like you say, takes that. It does really take that bravery.
It does on everybody's side, but there's lots of ways that people can educate them, sort of online themselves, online and offline. But also for some companies, what they've started to implement now is having their employee resource group networks, the respective leads, aligned to a board member, and they have monthly meetings where the feedback goes to the board, how each sort of marginalized group is feeling, what are the issues. Because also there's that fear of speaking up and, what will that do with my career progression? But if you have a spokesperson for a group, it's exactly that. It's not your experiences, it's the
Mhm.
collective. And then it's an opportunity then for board members to hear what's happening, on the ground, but also take action. So I think I really like that idea, and that's really helped drive inclusivity. They've also
Mm.
really strong and diversity representation much higher than average. And they retain their staff as well, particularly from the
Mhm.
underrepresented groups. So I think there's lots of measures that companies need to do, but there needs to be that commitment at every level of the organization.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. So when it comes to the environments and industries like tech in particular, what do you feel that men need to know about being a woman in these spaces? What do you wish that they knew?
Well, we're not always emotional and we're not
Yeah.
aggressive when we speak up. Yeah, what do men need to know? I think, that women, have their unique strengths, men and women, and also non-binary or however people identify as, are all different and we all bring different strengths and different superpowers. And it's about sort of leveraging those to help propel careers forward. It's that, it's the power of diversity, the diversity of thinking, the diversity of representation that's really going to drive the innovation. And then also from a numbers perspective, statistically, more diverse organizations are more profitable, and companies with more diverse boards are also more profitable and more successful. It's a great question, actually. I'll reflect a little bit more on that.
I feel like there's a really, for me, I feel like this is almost like quite a long list now that is found. One of the ones actually in terms of emotional, I feel like what I would love for men to maybe reflect on is that anger is also an emotion, frustration is also an emotion, and the emotions that women might demonstrate are no less valid, and the ones that men are conditioned into being able to demonstrate freely are still emotions, and they are, by the nature of it, being emotional. And yeah, it's not a bad thing, it's just a different, it's just where it's okay for men to do it in a way that, is less okay for women.
Absolutely. And also as women, we have different phases of our life cycle, and that impacts us as women at different phases of our life. And I think there needs to be a lot more education on that in the
Mm.
workplace and understanding. And then also with this sort of having children as well, to know that actually we're not less capable or less committed. If we as women are the ones picking up the children or doing the doctor's appointments, we're actually a lot more efficient as a result of that.
Yeah, absolutely. What advice would you give to younger women who are navigating the earlier stages of their careers in industries like tech?
Really take control of your career. I think be clear on what your career aspirations are and communicate them. I think that's really important is for you yourself to take control of your career. Nobody knows what you want better than you yourself. Don't be afraid to push for the things that you want, for the next promotion, for the next pay increase. We often put relationships and fear of upsetting people at the expense of our own career and what we feel we should deserve. It is okay to negotiate. So it's expected that we do, particularly if you're in a sort of sales or customer facing issue situation. So I think when you put that lens on, it's actually quite helpful. And, also be, make sure you choose employers and managers who are aligned to your values and what you're committed to. So when you're going for an interview, often we think, okay, it's the company interviewing us. but also you're interviewing the company. So, make sure that you are selective with who you choose to work for, that it is aligned to your values and your passions, because you do spend a big portion of your life at work. So it's important that you find that joy and fulfillment. And my final piece of advice is, always be learning, have that growth mindset. The tech industry is evolving at such a phenomenal rate. We have obviously AI, robotics, automation, the whole sort of structure of the workplace is changing. And I think the World Economic Forum estimates that I think about 50% of jobs will no longer be in existence in the next 25 to 30 years. So make sure that you're at the forefront and you're constantly learning about new technologies so that you can build that career resilience and be adaptable to the changes that are happening right now.
Yeah, I love that. I really love this piece about taking the control and taking the ownership and being really clear about what you want. I think it's really easy to assume that people know what we want and what we need and where that might differ from other people around us. But actually it's so important that we articulate that and that enables us to push for these things that we can get, enables us to have conversations around salary negotiations, and it enables us to be really clear about what's going to benefit us for the next step. I think that's super helpful. Before we wrap up, where can people find you? Is there anything you want people to know about that you want to share?
Absolutely. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Angie Vaux, and our website is womenintechforum.com. We do offer a sort of structured program of professional development for women at every stage through our membership. So you'll get an opportunity to participate in our monthly virtual events, masterclasses, and we've got a career development platform as well, which houses all of our content. So it's a great forum to get real life actionable insights to support your career development and to network with other female leaders and peers. So, yeah, so you can sign up on our website or you can book a meeting in with me as well if you want to chat further. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you. Yeah, definitely check it out. It's a really incredible forum and lots of really, really brilliant women are a part of it. So it's a great place to be in. I think whatever stage you're at.
Thank you.
Amazing. Angie, thank you so much for your time and for all of your thoughts and your advice. This has been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for being a great host. And I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.